It is 10 minutes after 10 o'clock. You're inside Brunch from 107.7. Let's get to the telephone. As I mentioned to you, as we all know, the Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, former Prime Minister, passed on yesterday morning at 8:15. And we are looking to celebrate and to look at the contribution that he made to Trinidad and Tobago. And that indeed is numerous. Nobody would know better of that contribution and the individual than former Senator Conrad Enill. He was also Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me.
It is an occasion where the nation is sad because we lost a great contributor. We lost a son. We lost a man that led us, that many folks knew had a vision. A lot of folks don't have the insight as to the depth of emotion and the passion that he held with his vision. I ask you here this morning just to give the nation a feel as to the man you knew, because you knew him not just in the official capacity, but personally in also working with him. The man that was Patrick Manning. Could you give, for those who are not aware, give a refresher, as it were, to those even who are aware of his contribution?
Well, first of all, before I begin that, let me say on behalf of all of us that we recognize at this time the family's difficulty, and we wish them well at this time, as well as can be. Mm-hmm. And we wish to indicate to them our thanks for sharing him with us. That's the first issue. The second issue is I think that Patrick Manning was unique in a number of ways. One of which was that he was there at the beginning, and therefore he was able to transition leaders. And in a real sense, therefore, he learned what leaders wanted. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when the opportunity arose, when he became Prime Minister, and he had the resources, he simply executed. So that, for example, on the energy side, he created for us the energy infrastructure. But that energy infrastructure was something that Eric Williams started. If you looked at the history, you would see, for example, that somewhere in about 1972, Eric Williams set out for Trinidad and Tobago a vision for creating a modern industrial state. Mm-hmm. He said that, blessed as we are with oil and gas, there are those who would tell us that what we need to do is simply export the product and for some short time live a life of luxury. This we had completely rejected. For if we were to do that, we are basically putting the country on a dole. What we have decided to do is the more difficult job of getting into the petrochemical sector and creating industries in ammonia, methanol, aluminum. And in that way, we would develop the modern industrial state. And that is what drove all the activities that we saw today, which from 2000 to 2015 allowed the country to continue to live a particular style based on gas resources. Patrick Manning was able to execute that, having understood basically the vision of the preceding leaders. So in a sense, therefore, he understood the context and he was in a position to implement, and he just did that. So insofar as that is concerned, on the government side, he would have executed that. But he used political office to do a number of things. Mm-hmm. He used political office to improve the quality of life of ordinary citizens, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in countries that were close to Trinidad and Tobago. Because he recognized that if Trinidad and Tobago was doing well and the other countries were not doing as well, it meant that people would leave those countries and come into Trinidad and Tobago. And in a sense, Trinidad and Tobago would have a responsibility for which our infrastructure was not developed. Mm-hmm. So his view always was that you ensure that the communities around you are taken care of so that your country can develop at the rate that you wanted it to develop without having to deal with the issues of additional people coming in as a result of their own circumstances.
You're listening to Brunch on 107.7. The voice you're hearing is that of former Senator Conrad Enill, who also was Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. And it's very important that you hit the 1-2 shot there, because when you look at a place like St. Vincent and the Grenadines and you realize, of course, there's a Manningville there, you look at the sentiments coming from many leaders of that time, now speaking to the Caribbean commitment of Mr. Manning. It was, in fact, twofold. For one was a passion for my brother, my brother's keeper, which is to look at the region. And then there was also the practical side you just mentioned, which is if I don't take care of my brother, then his kids will in fact come by me, and nobody will be happy about that.
Yeah, I also think that there's something else that is not understood, and it is this. If you looked at the charter of the PNM, that is to say the political organization and its aspirations, you would see that one of the objectives of the PNM is really to ensure that there is Caribbean unity. Mm-hmm. So in a real sense, therefore, Patrick Manning, as political leader of the PNM, was in fact implementing through government the objectives of the party called the People's National Movement. And therefore, if you looked today at the document that basically sets out how the party will operate, and you look at the objects of the party as it relates to what it would present to the population, should it ever get into government, you could almost go through the items one by one and see how these were implemented during the Patrick Manning era. So, for example, the whole question of equality, racial solidarity, and a number of the issues that you see, even our position in the globe as it relates to international affairs, Caribbean affairs, national security, all of those principles are contained in the document that is called the Constitution of the People's National Movement under its Objects Clause. So if you really wanted to understand the contribution of Patrick Manning to Trinidad and Tobago, to the Caribbean, and to the world, you simply need to get a copy of the Constitution and go back and look at the objectives, and you would be able to pick up where and at what point in history those objectives were in fact realized and or implemented.
We're remembering the former Prime Minister, Patrick Augustus Mervyn Manning. We are talking to Senator Conrad Enill. You know, when you look at the era, a lot of folks talk now about the vision thing. And I think Mr. Manning had the fortune of having a couple of his long-standing friends, including a number of folks who studied with him, whether it be Ralph Gonzalez, whether it be Patterson, whether it be Owen Arthur, folks with a vision who understood that whole Caribbean concept was not a case of taking care of their little island, because we all are little, taking care of their share of the earth, but in fact it was a collective effort to make everybody prosper for the same reason. If one is out, the other one is in fact going to be in a not too comfortable position, as their people, of course, will travel and be suffering.
But I think it has to do more with an understanding of our history. If you looked at the history of the Caribbean, many of us came here, got off at different islands, but came from the same place. And therefore, in a sense, we are a community. And while we tried to develop our communities, we were faced with different challenges, and we had different assets available to us. I remember very well, during the period that I certainly was involved with him, the Grenada story. And I know, for example, one day we got up and found that Grenada was in a mess. And I remember him making sufficient arrangements, or I made the arrangements, so that the Grenadian Prime Minister can, in fact, come down to certainly one of the offices we had in the Twin Towers and actually manage his office from there. And we gave him a secretary, we gave him all the support that was required in order to continue with the business of running his country. That country was in a difficult place. In fact, when we created the Caribbean Energy Fund, in which once the price of energy went beyond a particular number, we made available to territories funds for which they would decide how they would use it. He was strongly criticized. I remember even being criticized in his own country by people who were saying you need to look at your country first, and he was making the point that, listen, the circumstances under which those persons were operating today does not allow us to take that position. Our position is that we have to deal with them because they are simply people and they need to be looked after because their circumstances are different. That was the kind of man that he was, and that's how he, in a lot of instances, fought for the individuals who would have not been able to fight for themselves.
There is a certain cognizance of the needs of the country, specifically in the area of education and opportunities that he was passionate about. And I wonder if there's a juxta between that and the fact that he entered politics right after the uprising here, which was 1971. He was age 24 at the time. And he would have come in with a sense of the frustration that was being, in fact, demonstrated for on the streets. In what way you think that contributed to deepening his passion in the fulfillment of, as you said, what is on the party's platform?
I think that at the era that he came into the politics and at the era that he was part of the University of the West Indies, in researching some of that and looking at some of that, what comes to mind is that most of the leaders that came out in that era had a particular philosophy of what they wanted to do in the Caribbean. And they subscribed to a particular ideology that said, coming from colonization and having us, being able now to educate ourselves, we should be in a position to try and determine what our future should be. And we should be directly involved in that. And if you looked at most of the Caribbean leaders, they all went to school together, they all went to the University of the West Indies, they were all trained by the same individuals, and therefore they all saw the world almost in the same way. And therefore, when they got into government, they went to school together, and therefore they were able to sit down and discuss issues not as leaders only, but as persons who had a bigger vision of creating a better society for all the people. And I think that in some way assisted.
And that is the vision thing I talked about, when not to detract at all from his passion or his contribution. There was a collective desire among his peers at the university to see the world through different glasses, as it were. Speak to the Honorable Prime Minister dedication to education, because in no small means was that is that a major achievement for him.
Well, let me talk to education from two perspectives. The first one is I think that his vision for education has been misunderstood by a lot of people. He basically created the circumstances by which any Trinidadian, and this was even within his own party, there were people who couldn't see it. What he said was this: any Trinidadian who wished to study anywhere in the world in which there was an opportunity, we would pay for it. And of course, there was a narrow view that, well, what you're doing that for, you need to deal with the needs of your society. You need to find people for what your country is going to do. And he had the view that says, hold on a minute, we are moving into a globalized society, and it means the opportunities will be global. They're not going to be local. In those circumstances, therefore, what you need to do is to develop Trinidad and Tobago citizens for the globe.
Yes.
And if you're going to do that, you can't do that only at the University of the West Indies. You have to do that where the institutions of knowledge are. Additionally, one of the things that he did is he made sure that, for example, the Seventh-day Adventist College became a university. He made sure that Postart was basically integrated within the system. He revamped the way in which we looked at education. And he also developed basically the University of Trinidad and Tobago with a different focus. The University of Trinidad and Tobago was the focus point at which we would do two things. We would ensure that our energy sector, human resources, would be able to move into activities where traditionally those activities would have been handled by Houston and by other areas like that. He also ensured that, like for the non-energy sector, UTT created a series of clusters. And what happened with UTT, for example, was that they would develop a cluster, they would put resources in it, and they would try to get a plan that would look at the next 10 years, let's say, of what the industry might look like, what the needs of the industry would be, and how do you train human resources for that? All of that was part of the Patrick Manning view of Trinidad and Tobago and what we needed and how we should deal with it. So that today, for example, when you hear you have Trinidadians who are excelling in various parts of the world and doing well, it really is because of the deliberate action taken by Patrick Manning insofar as making education available, educational opportunities available, not for Trinidad and Tobago, but for Trinidadians who have a global reach, who have a global desire, and who, in fact, were able to compete with the best in class throughout the world.
It is 23 minutes after 10 o'clock here inside Brunch. We're speaking to Senator Conrad Enill. We are talking about the man and the contribution of the Honorable Prime Minister Patrick Manning, who passed yesterday morning at 8:45, entering politics at age 24, spending a lot of time understanding the vision and of Eric Williams, understanding his contribution in new time, having his colleagues with him, laid a sort of environment that recruited a lot of people into his vision. Speak to the infrastructural contribution that the former Prime Minister made. I speak specifically of the waterfront. I speak specifically of Port of Spain as we know it now.
Well, let me talk to philosophically where we are on that. When we started in 2000, so let's back up a little bit. In 2001, when I entered, certainly when he invited me to be part of the process of transforming Trinidad and Tobago, because that was what Vision 2020 specifically was,
yes,
we decided on two things. We decided on a time frame, and we decided on an implementation plan. The first issue had to do with resources. What many people didn't understand is that the rate of development was very consistent with the access to resources that were available to us. So, for example, when we came into government and we looked at the Ryder Scott report, which basically is an indication of what happens with energy resources, we saw, for example, that we had, on the basis of the work being done by the companies, 13 years, just about 13 years of resources. That is to say, that given the work that they were doing, there were 13 years by which we could continue to have a development program for which resources would always be available. What we learned historically was that when we were into oil alone as a product, as an energy product, we suffered from boom and bust price reality. We suffered from the commodity price cycle price shock. That is to say, when the prices were high, the country was great. When the prices were low, the country was basically in poverty. Gas pricing has a different characteristics. Gas pricing is high volume, low unit price. Oil is low volume, high price. So that there are two different characteristics. We found ourselves on the gas matrix, which meant that we were able to do development for 13 years without worrying about resources. And therefore we set about to do that. And that is where the 2020 objective came from, because we felt that in 20 years, looking at 4 5-year development plans, we would have accomplished everything that was required, so that by the time you got to 2020, you would have been able to see, on the basis of statistics that measure these matters, that Trinidad and Tobago was a developed society, and there are a number of matrices that we use. Let's get back to the timing of that. The first issue that we had to deal with, for example, was the social issue. So that you would find, if you looked at the budget speeches that we certainly wrote, that from 2001 just about to 2010, if you looked at the themes for the various budgets, you would see the evolution of the plan. So the first issue had to do with the issue of social services, because we felt that at the time the social services needed to be dealt with. So we developed a number of programs that were intended to assist those in our society who needed to be helped. That's where the transfers and subsidies started to get high. because he felt that if the country was doing well, then there are people in our society who should be doing well as well. And he decided that there were specific programs that were needed to deal with specific problems. So, for example, we had women who had children who had no husbands and were finding it difficult to feed them. Mm-hmm. That's how CPEP was developed. And it's unfortunate because some of the commentators who speak about it without the benefit of what the intent was, mm-hmm. and simply looked at their view of how money should be spent. And his view was always the purpose of a government, and this is something I learned from him, is not to listen to economics, so individuals who studied economics and who will tell you how to solve the problems economically, but basically to understand what the needs of your people are and to use your power in office to make their lives better, even if it means at times going against those who have different views, who have a different view. And in many of the criticisms that were leveled at him by those in our society who consider themselves to be very academic in what they're doing, his view was, but that's not what we were put here for. We were not put here to look at an academic solution. Mm-hmm. We were put here to stop the suffering of individuals who, as a result of putting us in power, wanted to have a better quality of life for themselves and their children, and that is what we must do.
The voice you're hearing is that of Senator Conrad Enill. He's former Minister of Energy and Industries. We decided we wanted to go that direction because exactly what you're doing is what I think is often misunderstood. It is one thing I always feel, and clearly it is what you said that the former Prime Minister shared, accountants should not be running governments. Because looking at the bottom sheet means that you have taken the heart, you have taken the human part of it out of it. So I am clear on that. So many folks who thought he was one who would not listen, it is true to say, I ask you, is it true to say that it's because he understood his version of governance, and he would not be swayed by those who saw a bottom line or saw a look away from what the problem is?
There's this notion that his head hard and he doesn't listen. That is so far from the truth that it's almost laughable. When I ran with him the Ministry of Finance, we had I think it is Tuesday morning, every single senior technocrat in the Ministry of Finance. So we had the Permanent Secretary, we had the Governor of the Central Bank, we had the Director of Budgets, we had the specialist as it relates to international affairs, we had the Chairman of the SEC. And this group came together and simply said, okay, on this particular matter today, what are the technical areas for which we must be concerned? And we looked at a number of technical issues. And he was in the middle of that conversation, listening to all the experts and listening to everybody talk about everything. And then he would say, listen, our objective, as we had identified to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the manifesto, is that we will do such and such and thing. While I hear what you are saying, we have to find a way to do it so that we keep faith with the people. How do we do that? Mm-hmm. And then, so for example, one of the very public discussions that we had was the issue with the Governor of the Central Bank and with myself, who basically was looking at two different issues. Success for the Governor of the Central Bank has to do with a low inflation rate. Success for me has to do with a low unemployment rate. Unfortunately, within the cycle of economics, if you have a low unemployment rate, mm-hmm. usually the system says that because you are creating demand for which there is no supply, the inflation rate will go up. So that if I am successful at bringing the unemployment rate down, I'm going to upset the Governor of the Central Bank because he's going to all of a sudden have to deal with inflation. He's going to have to look at monetary supply. He's going to have to look at fiscal injections. And my view was that as finance minister, I am in charge of fiscal policy, and therefore it is fiscal policy that will rule and not monetary policy. Mm-hmm. And therefore it is those kinds of conflicts that suddenly erupted in the public domain And you heard commentary that, oh, he doesn't listen. It's not that he doesn't listen. It's that the promises that were made to the people of Trinidad and Tobago within the context of what they had supported him in going forward was at variance to what the chief technocrat was saying, and therefore what will prevail would be his commitment to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's who he was.
I can only thank you for taking the time to be in here. But if you had to identify, go back to Vision 2020, would you say that he was comfortable that most of what was articulated in that document, in that vision, were in fact achieved?
I don't think that is how I would characterize it. I would characterize it this way. I would say that while Vision 2020 is a document, what he expressed to many of us who in fact joined him in assisting in the transformation of Trinidad and Tobago was a mental position that says, listen, Trinidad and Tobago should be able to develop in a state where we are best in class, where in a sense we are able to do better and to do more than anybody else with the resources that we have. Size, therefore, should not be the determining factor in our success. I think that what he also did is he established a goal for us that says, yeah, in order for us to be the best, we have to change our game. And one of the things that he did, insofar as that was concerned, is to create instruments, to create vehicles that will allow us to do just that. So, for example, the special purpose vehicles that were created were implementation vehicles which recognize the shortcomings of the current systems that we had. And he was prepared to go ahead and fight those issues. He was prepared to develop those issues, and he was prepared to take on everybody and anybody just to ensure that those objectives were set. And if there's one thing that I remember about Patrick Manning, there are lots of things I remember about him. If it is one thing I remember about him is that he was a man of infinite patience.
Mm-hmm.
He was very patient. He also allowed for mistakes. He allowed you to make your mistakes because he found that he himself had made a lot of mistakes, and the leaders that he had never criticized him for it. They simply asked him, well, what did you learn from it? Because he felt that if you did not make mistakes, you couldn't learn. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of tolerance for individuals who were, and strangely enough, he was a very humorous man. The amount of jokes that he would tell you is unbelievable. He was also a very religious man. Mm-hmm. There are a lot that you could learn from Patrick Manning. The one regret that I have is that we had not taken the time while he was still with us to actually document some of his thoughts as they related to the struggles that he has had, because he's had a lot of struggles. I was very close to some of those struggles. I understood some of those struggles. Mm-hmm. Leadership is a very lonely profession, and I think he understood that, and I think that he, more than anybody else, tried to shield the population in a lot of instances from a lot of the difficulties that ordinarily would have been something that we'd have to deal with. I think he really tried to shield many people from pain, and he took it on himself, and that's the man.
The learning you speak about, the patience and so on, is not at variance with the person who brought him into politics, the Right Honorable Dr. Eric Williams, in the sense that you have to understand that at that time there was a learning curve, as it were. I mean, he's in at age 24, and you learn that you are going to make mistakes. You have to be forgiving, but I'm really happy that you pointed the area, the humanity of the late Prime Minister, because that sense of humanity where it's difficult to keep that when you are in that so-called tower, because everybody's willing to go with you when you make good choices. But if you take one that's against their interest, then you find it's a very lonely place indeed.
Correct. Absolutely.
I thank you so much for taking the time, sir. The nation will be mourning. I believe it is for 4 days, and the funeral, I believe, is on Saturday. You were right along there with him, and I understand your loss, and as the nation feels that loss along with you, for a great leader, a great contributor to the country. Senator, I thank you so much for taking the time to be with us inside Brunch this morning.
Thank you for asking me.
And you have a wonderful day, sir.